It says scientist. So a scientist is speaking. Physicists claim that their system of careful peer review prevents scientific fraud in physics effectively. Okay. So this scientist is telling us what some physicists claim. So I'm kind of anticipating this scientist to come back and say that they're wrong, that maybe careful peer review does not prevent scientific fraud, but I don't know yet.
Okay.
But there's that but biologists claimed the same thing for their field 20 years ago. Not good. And they turned out to be wrong.
Oh, dear God. Halfway through this argument, I'm anticipating that they're going to do something really stupid.
What are you anticipating?
Well, I'm anticipating that they're going to go along the lines of, well, the biologists made the same claim and they were wrong. Therefore, physicists have to also be wrong.
Yeah.
And they haven't done that yet. But I have a lot of experience with the LSAT, and on logical reasoning, they do a lot of really dumb shit. And this just feels like that pattern. It feels like that's what they're going to do. I'm a really good reader. And the reason why, or one of the things that really good readers tend to do, is predict what they think is going to come next. I'm not sure that this scientist is going to go that way, but I'm attuned to it. I'm primed for them to make that mistake. Like I'm about ready to call them on their bullshit before they even got to the bullshit.
Yeah. And just to clarify, why would that argument be so bad? I mean, the biologists made that claim 20 years ago and they were wrong. So why doesn't that mean that the physicists are wrong?
Because biologists and physicists could be completely different people, and different people are allowed to do different things.
Yep.
I mean, just because one time, it's like saying it's like saying Donald Trump is a reality star who got elected president. Therefore, insert any of today's reality stars. Thank God I don't even know who they are, but insert whoever who is hosts a reality show. Therefore, Tom Bergeron, he used to be, I don't know, I'm not sure if he's still hosting Dancing with the Stars. But, it's like, oh, so therefore Tom Bergeron has to be the president of the United States. That's a similar argument, right? It's a parallel
Yeah.
argument.
Yeah. Well, they could
But
have had different systems, right? The physicists had careful peer review. Um, maybe the biologist careful peer review was conducted differently, and that
yeah,
difference is all that mattered.
all
So we'll
this would
see.
flash through my head in 1 second, by the way. I mean, it's just like, all I'm saying is, please don't do that. I mean, or please do that, because if you do that, then I already know the answer to whatever question you're going to ask me.
Yeah.
But they don't have to do that. They could go an entirely different direction.
They continue.
Okay.
Since then, biologists have greatly enhanced their discipline's safeguards against scientific fraud, thus preventing further major incidents. Okay, I'm glad that they've made those changes. Maybe the physicists have also already made those changes. It would be conducive to progress in physics if physicists were to do the same thing.
It's
Ooh,
similar to what I thought they were going to do.
it's an interesting twist. It's this. I would say that this is the conclusion, right? Um, the author is trying to prove that if the physicists made the same changes that the biologists made, that would help physics, conducive to progress in physics. Would it?
Wait, say that one more time. You didn't go where I thought you were going to go.
Oh, I'm just curious. Would if the physicists were to do the same thing, in other words, if they were to greatly enhance their safeguards against scientific fraud and prevent incidents that may or may not even exist, would that be conducive to progress?
Well, it certainly stands to reason. It does not say that in the argument itself. It
Yeah.
assumes that that is true.
Yeah.
I mean, fraud seems bad.
Does seem bad.
Preventing major incidents of scientific fraud seems like a conducive to progress in a scientific field. It's true that they did not explicitly say that. They left it for the reader to infer that. And that's not good legal writing. Legal writing is technical writing. It's like computer code. You didn't write the line of code that said, if you prevent incidents against scientific fraud, then that would be conducive to progress. Another way of getting to that same analysis is to note that conducive to progress is new shit that only came up in the conclusion.
Exactly. That's what I'm getting at. It's like, where did this come from, right? I was almost even anticipating a different conclusion, like therefore, they really are. I thought it was that they were wrong. Because the biologists were wrong. So I thought this person was going to end up saying that the physicists are wrong.
Yeah. But
But
they did do the thing that I was worried about, which was, oh, so anything that applies in physics also has to apply, or sorry, anything that applies in biology also has to apply in physics. That's
yeah,
another thing that they didn't say, by the way.
yeah, yeah,
And it turns out to be a strengthening question. The conclusion of the scientist's argument is most strongly supported if which one of the following is assumed. And I guess we have I have two predictions here. Yours was, hey, if you avoid major incidents of scientific fraud, it is conducive to progress.
yep.
That's
That's
an
my
obvious assumption of the argument. It's almost hard to see it because it's so just like common sense that that would be the case, but they
yep.
didn't say it and they need to put that into their brief.
By the way, I
Um,
want to step in here for 1 second. You
wait,
said it's
hold on.
common sense.
Oh,
Okay, yeah, yeah. Go
well,
ahead.
I was just going to say my other prediction is
Yep.
anything that applies to biology applies to physics. So we have two different
Yes,
predictions. But what do you want to say?
those are good. Yeah, I was gonna say, although you said it's like so obvious that it's common sense, it still wouldn't fall into the category of reasonable assumptions. I think that the LSAT is looking for, because at the end of the day, we don't really have any clue, right? For all we know, major fraud actually propels the discipline forward dramatically because as it gets exposed, it generates all this interest and attention. I mean,
Could be the
we
case.
have no
Yeah.
idea, right? Like,
Well, if you don't make it explicit,
mm-hmm.
then there's room for people to argue,
Yep.
you know, and you just don't want to leave room for argument. You want to just suck all the oxygen out of your opponent's case by making every single thing totally explicit to where in a perfect world you win on just like summary judgment because it's just all there on the paperwork and the judge looks at it and goes, yep, this is legit. Sorry, we're not there's nothing for us to argue about, so we're not going to court.
Yeah.
So yeah, making even obvious things explicit makes an argument better.
Yeah. All right. So it's asking us which one would strengthen the argument or support the argument the most if it were true. A says major incidents of scientific fraud in a scientific discipline are deleterious to progress in that discipline. Okay. Deleterious is the word we talked about the other day on the show. It means harmful, not good. Yeah. So if those things hurt progress, then getting rid of them would presumably be conducive to progress.
Yeah, and that word is intimidating to people, and they're not going to like that answer choice if they're not that familiar with deleterious. But I mean, look, it's the word delete. It's the actual entire word delete, followed by RIOUS, which IOUS is a very common suffix on a word, which just means what? Of that nature. So deleterious is of the nature of deleting. That's probably like the exact definition of the word. And I understand that you've maybe not seen that word before, although if you read more books, you would have seen that word before. Um, but even if you haven't ever seen that word before,
Mhm.
you got to kind of grind it out. I mean, you've got a delete key on the keyboard in front of you, I guarantee.
Yep.
So you should, I don't know, you got to hang in there and figure out what that word means. So that's going to turn out to be the answer. Now, if you
Yep.
don't like it because you don't know what that word means, that's okay, because you can still eliminate the 4 wrong answers.
Yeah. So B says very few incidents of even minor scientific fraud have occurred in biology over the last 20 years. Okay. Um, I guess this is like trying to strengthen a premise almost.
Yeah, and it just doesn't do shit, because we already have admitted into evidence
Mm-hmm.
that since biologists made this change, they have greatly enhanced their discipline safeguards against scientific fraud, thus preventing further major incidents. There used to be major incidents, and now there have been no major incidents.
And now this is saying there's not very many minor ones, but who cares?
Right.
Yeah.
We already know that they have figured out a way to prevent major incidents of scientific fraud.
Mm-hmm. And that's what it's been about. Yeah.
So B's like, oh, and there's even hardly been any minor fraud. Yeah, whatever. We know that the biologists did well.
Yeah.
Strengthening that premise doesn't. It's a weak strengthener of a premise, and premises don't even need to be strengthened. We have to accept them as fact to begin with.
Yeah.
Okay.
Answer C. No system of careful peer review is completely effective in preventing scientific fraud in any scientific discipline. Okay. Well, that means no one's perfect. If anything, that just hurts the argument. Like, oh,
That
you're
no, I
never gonna
say
get.
it definitely hurts the argument. I mean, your opponent gets a copy of your brief.
Mhm.
If you put that in your brief, your opponent is going to try to use it. It's like, hey, even Mr. Scientist, who's trying to prove that, you know, physicists will benefit it'll be conducive to progress in physics, but even they acknowledge that no system of careful peer review is completely effective in preventing scientific fraud in any scientific discipline.
Mhm.
So you don't get to make the conclusion that this is going to be conducive to progress in physics. You've
Yeah.
acknowledged in your own brief that this plan might not work, which means you don't get to reach the conclusion that you're trying to reach. This is,
Yeah.
to me, it's not a devastating weakener because it's only a possibility.
Mhm.
But would you put that into the brief? Absolutely not. You're giving your opponent ammunition.
Yeah.
Okay.
So B's out, C's out. Answer D says 20 years ago, the system of peer review in biology was less effective in preventing scientific fraud than the system of peer review in physics is today. Okay, so
What are we
physics is actually,
comparing?
yeah, but this is actually saying that physics today is better than biology was 20 years ago. So maybe physics doesn't need
Oh,
to
so
change as much.
it's another weakener.
It's another weakener.
It's like, so the objection is, well, but actually physics is starting in a much better place than biology was.
Yeah.
So yeah, they made this change, and yeah, it helped them a lot to avoid scientific fraud, but
Is it going to help us?
it doesn't
Maybe
necessarily have to
not.
help us because we're better situated. Yeah. So again, another weakener. Okay.
E. Over the years, there have been relatively few, if any, major incidents of scientific fraud in physics.
Wow.
Okay, that's another weakener. Um,
Yeah. E says, why do we need to do this? We don't really have major fraud in our field.
yeah,
So C, D, and E are all weakeners. Can't pick any of those. B strengthens a premise, which I guess if you missed this question, that's probably what you picked. But we accept the premises as fact. We don't need to pile on here with additional evidence. We already know that major fraud has been prevented. So minor fraud and B, acknowledges that some minor fraud has occurred. And to that extent, it could be used as a weakener. So it's, we got three clear weakeners, one that strengthens a premise in a weak way, or maybe, could be used as a weakener. And we go back to A and we see that it bridges the gap between the evidence and the conclusion.
This is a level 5 question.
Mm.
I think people are getting thrown off by that deleterious.
And probably sucked into B. I mean, if they're missing it, they got to be missing it because of B.
Yeah.
How do you choose? You can't choose a weakener, y'all, for a strengthen question. C,
Yeah.
D, and E are all going to weaken your case. You can't pick those. B, yeah, you're supporting your evidence, but the thing you missed, and if you just would have been critical of the argument itself, right? If you just cover up the question and cover up the answer choices, if you just spent more time with that scientist's argument, you'd realize that the main conclusion of the argument includes conducive to progress. Progress had never been mentioned in the three premises.
Yeah.
Conducive to progress is a new element that came up only in the conclusion of the argument. And the reason why the answer is A is that it connects the evidence that we have, which is about preventing major incidents of scientific fraud. It connects that to the conclusion that we're trying to make, which is about being conducive to progress. Deleterious to progress is the opposite of conducive to progress. Yeah. And so A connects the dots there and says, yeah, if you've got major incidents of fraud, that's bad for progress, which then makes it all make more sense that if you avoid these incidents of fraud, you will enhance progress.
Amen.